The Disrupt Education vlog can be found on YouTube. To hear it in podcast form, search Disrupt Education on any of the following podcast platforms: Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Radio Public, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or Stitcher. Welcome to this episode of Disrupt Education. I'm the host, Peter Hostrasser. I have an amazing guest today, Arielle Nobile. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. An American film director. I can't even read all the awards that you've won, although, I try to make people humble. and somebody who does amazing work in film and documentaries. Can you start us off with a little bit of your backstory?
Sure. I mean, it's like that big question, right? And actually, I'm going to answer it with kind of a story, which was that in college, I went to the experimental theater wing at NYU, and we took a couple of classes called self-scripting. And one of my favorite parts of that class was we would sit in a circle, like 20 people, and you would have 2 minutes to be like, catch us up on how you got to this moment in your life. And it was like, whoa, how do you tell your whole life story in 2 minutes? But I'm going to try. So, I was born in Evanston, Illinois, went to Baker Demonstration School, which was part of National Louis University Teacher College. My mom was an art teacher up until I was born, and then she didn't go back to teaching until I was in high school, but public school art teacher. So I got to go to this amazing preschool and kindergarten at Baker, where I had Betty Weeks was my kindergarten teacher. Do you know who she is?
I've heard of the name. It's got to remind.
She's a renowned storyteller.
Right. Okay.
And so some of my earliest school memories are sitting around a fake campfire that we would make with those like bricks, those cardboard brick things. Mm-hmm. And we would tell like Native American ghost stories. And like, this was kindergarten. And it was so about fantasy and storytelling and the magic of nature and just, the mythical, just reality of being alive. So I feel like I was so lucky to have that beginning education experience, because I did love, it was all play-based.
Yeah.
And then we moved to Wilmette, and I went to public school, in Mackenzie Elementary. Still love to drive by it and be like, oh, that was the source of so much. But I was, I would say I was always above average student. I don't think I cared. My parents were very good about not emphasizing grades or performance. It was like I never worried about that. My mom now tells me a story. I didn't know this, but there was this, I think it was called EEP. It was like a gifted program within the school that I must have tested just below being able to be in. And my mom is not this kind of parent, but I guess she was mad that I didn't get into it. So she advocated for me to get into it, but then they didn't let me in fully. I was only in it partway. So it's like, well, what does that mean? You're sort of gifted. Right. And so I remember going into this dark room. Some of my good friends were in it, and we did really cool archaeology. It was like Egyptian. We did a whole thing with hieroglyphs and clay. And it was like this other room that only special kids went in, right? But I only got to go there part of the time that the other kids I knew were there. So it was like this weird being in two worlds. I was always really a good writer and reader, and math, I'm sure early on I just thought I was bad at it, even though if I look at my story of math, I was never bad at math. I was in advanced math even, but it's sort of maybe the stereotypical girl thing in public school of getting that messaging. And then I went, middle school was hell, just as far as social and emotional stuff.
I can agree.
And then I went to New Trier High School, where again, I was sort of in, honors classes eventually. So New Trier, I don't know if you're familiar with the level system, but I was in 3 and 4 level. And when I was an adult in my early 20s, starting my business, I went back and substitute taught at New Trier for a year and a half or so. And it was a great job. It was so amazing. I want to write about it someday, because it was like seeing this education machine from the other side, and what all goes into it. I made good friends there, and I was there actually pretty much every day, all day, because I could sub in dance and music and theater and Spanish. And like I had all these they were like, who are you? And if I had been a quote unquote regular teacher, I never would have gotten to teach in all those classes or meet or know the kids even, because I would sometimes see the same kids in multiple classes. But the level system, from seeing it from the teaching perspective, I was like, wow, there are so many schools within the school.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the expectations clearly, unfortunately, on those 2 level and even some of the 3 level kids were so low.
Yeah.
It was like, wow, this is really dumbed down. And also they're getting the messaging that they're not that smart or good at anything. That was, and then in 4 level, it was like, you always felt, I mean, I remember some kids who were just like, you could just tell like, well, this is a genius I'm sitting here debating philosophy with. Like, okay. And you are clearly like the nerdiest person in the world. And I love that, but I can like talk to you about these ideas. So I was probably infamous at New Trier as far as I had a biker jacket that I wore and I had dark makeup and I smoked and I was just sort of, badass, but really still my sweet, sensitive self, just like putting on the armor so I would be okay in a school of 4,000 kids that was going to eat me up. I always did theater from a young age. I started training at the Piven Theater Workshop in Evanston in 4th grade. And I would say that was probably the best education I had as far as humanity raising and empathy building and feeling of collaboration versus, because I never really bought into the competition stuff. Thank God my parents didn't either, but that was where I really felt I belonged in a lot of ways, even though I also felt I didn't belong there a lot, believe me, because it's just my battle with belonging as a person. But I definitely felt more seen there. Like I had more space and I could sort of get above or away from the drama of public school socialization stuff. And so when I went to New Trier, and there's this amazing, world-class theater training there. This is kind of a funny story, but in sophomore year, when we were starting to be allowed to audition for plays, they did the play Diary of Anne Frank. And I auditioned. I did not get in, but there were 2 Anne Franks, one of whom was this, at the time, friend of mine who was in movies like Apollo 13. She was like a famous child actor, basically. Well, she wasn't Jewish, and she got to be Anne Frank. And that made me so mad. It felt like such an injustice that I completely boycotted theater at New Trier for the rest of my time. I never auditioned for another thing. I just did Piven. And I was like, but it was really self-sabotaging in a way too, because I was like, well, now I don't have to try. Forget it. Forget it. I just won't do that. I'm it's totally unjust. So, I mean, that's kind of my nutshell for pre-college. And I always wanted to go to NYU. I think it was because of the Cosby Show, honestly. Because Theo went there and I loved him. And I was like, okay, I'm going to NYU. Of course, they have an amazing world-renowned theater program. So in high school, I actually went to UCLA for a summer too, to do a theater program there. Because it was sort of between New York or LA, right? Where are you going to be as an actor? Because I thought I was going to be an actor. So I went to UCLA, really beautiful campus, hated Westwood, hated the sort of culture. And I'm glad I had that opportunity, because I then knew I didn't want to be in LA. I used to call it Hell-A. Every time I go to LA, I like it more. It's grown on me over time. I think like any big city, you have to find your niche, and there's amazing people and amazing cultures there. But New York was like, I just loved it. So I went to New York. I mean, I graduated when I was 17 from high school. My birthday's in November. So I was a year younger than all my peers. I went to New York City at 17 to study experimental theater, and actually finished in 3.5 years. So, because I had AP credit. So that was good for the pocketbook, right? Because New York's not inexpensive. And that was really, that's when I knew that in terms of like especially senior year of high school, that the level of discourse and like the incredible education I'd been given as far as that opportunity to just really learn about human beings. Like I feel like my history classes, my English classes, and like I took a great AP grade books, which was just absolutely life-changing. And my teacher just died this past year, Raisa Landor, but she was such an amazing human, just how she led us in this dialogue process that I think informs how I do my dialogues with audiences today, right?
Yeah.
But going to NYU, no offense, NYU, but your academic classes were nothing compared to what I had been through at New Trier. And I was kind of disappointed because I was like, but then it also helps you, for me, it helped me see the inequities in our system, right?
Right.
And how, and not just, and it's obviously it's socioeconomic and racially based for sure, but it's also that level system, right?
Right.
That's an inequity, right? Just because you got slanted in some point in your life, maybe it was 7th grade and you took some tests and you maybe weren't paying attention, or you didn't feel, take tests well, or whatever. And then you're on this track forever.
Yeah.
And you feel this way about yourself. So I feel and my sister, for instance, she's 4 years younger than me. We never were in high school together, but she was on she went to RISD. She's like visual artist, creative that way, and did not do well in any of the public school settings like I did. And I was the older sister, and I wasn't an overachiever, but I didn't have to try hard. I wrote my papers the night before.
Right.
Got A's and B's. Like I once got a D in geometry, and that was like, oh my God. And I felt bad about it. Like my parents didn't care. It was me. I was like, how could I get a D? So I was that quintessential, like, quote unquote, good student.
Yeah.
Even though I might have seemed appearance wise like I was a badass.
Right. I mean, I'm telling you, a lot of people in film and acting that I've read on, I think about Gary Sinise, same thing, smoker, like had the jacket on. I was like, oh my gosh, before he went to Steppenwolf and did his thing. So I'll keep my eye out for the smokers and the people who are hanging out in leather jackets. I'm like, you're going to make it. You're going to be awesome. But I love that. And, it's so true. When I was listening to your story, one of the main things were experiences and stories, right? That's I'm sure I was good at math. I just checked the box, right? And I don't want to downplay math because there's stories in math as well. But it seems like those educators that kind of push story all the way back to kindergarten. What a wonderful experience.
And I can tell you the last math teacher I think I had that spoke to me was Mrs. Karakees in 7th grade. She was 4. I don't know what country she was from. She was old, quote unquote, she was probably 40, but she seemed really old in 7th grade. But she had this like sort of blonde hairdo, and she was beautiful. And she just, I don't know, I felt good at math in her class. She made me feel like I could do it. Maybe it was having a female math teacher. I don't know. I feel like I didn't have great math teachers at New Trier, but again, I was in 3 level, and maybe I was automatically, it wasn't as good. And I was going to say this too. I also did social service in high school. I was on the board there and did all kinds of, volunteer work. And that is also where I started to see, well, now I look at it and I'm like, gosh, I was so in this sort of white savior. Right. But I saw things, I put myself in positions where I was experiencing things that maybe the typical New Trier student didn't get to. Like I was hugging babies at Cook County Hospital and seeing just like abandoned kids and, just being at Cook County Hospital back in the 90s. I don't know if you've been there, but to get as a volunteer, there was like this whole underground tunnel system you had to go through because the neighborhood was so bad, right? Like they didn't want us kids walking in the parking lot there. And it was like such an education in that way too, of just seeing a different side of Chicago than the bubble I was coming from.
Yeah.
And that was powerful. And I think led to me, just noticing more. And even Rogers Park, I volunteered as an after school tutor. And those kids, I actually had to fire my tutie because she stopped showing up. And there was like other kids who didn't have tutors, and like I gave her a lot of chances, and then she wasn't doing it. So we decided that I would like teach her the lesson of you got to show up.
Yeah.
But like, I also knew that like her mom was a drug dealer and she was taking care of her little brother, and she was like 10. You know what I mean? It was like, oh God, but like I needed to help this other kid who was showing up. So those kinds of teenage experiences, I think also just led me to ask some questions just about our whole system that I might not have been aware of had I not had those
Absolutely.
extra experiences.
I mean, there's levels of trauma and what people go through, and you're right. I mean, we all kind of in the Midwest, we go through our thing, but we're very segregated, and as hopefully that's changing and we're understanding things. You tell stories. You tell stories of. Tell people's stories for them of their journeys and how is that been? What is that like? You have some great pieces, but man, I got to tell you, watching a few of your pieces, and I know one of the people who was in one of your documentaries. There's a lot of education in there. I'll just leave it there. So kind of unpack that. What are these documentaries not only doing for you, but I mean, I'm sure you have people who are saying, hey, Arielle, this is great. Like, I'm learning this. I never saw this lens.
Well, okay. So I guess I'll say this. I'm one of those people that since I was a little girl, first of all, I've been taking care of other people's children because I love children. And in the process of taking care of other people's children, since I was like 9, adults have been confiding in me for better or worse. So I've been listening to adult versions of reality from a really young age and being able to hold the space for that. So I think that just sort of sets the groundwork for who I am. And then I've been really curious about, well, how do we become ourselves, right? Like we all get. So, I mean, to take it sort of back even further, I was born 3 weeks late. It took 3 days to have me. And when I was born, I had a blood incompatibility with my mother, which says a lot. And we have a great relationship now, but, there was just a lot of fraught things there. So I almost died, right? I had a full blood exchange when I was born. And because I grew up knowing that story about myself, I chose to assign the meaning that I'm here for some reason. That I chose to stay in this body, that there's a purpose to my existence. So that is sort of the premise, like my bottom line belief system, right?
Yeah.
So then I translate that outward. Okay, and I look around at people, any single person I would see on the street, meet, pass, be in a subway car with, there's a story there. There is no single person walking around today or in a wheelchair or whatever, however you get around.
Right.
Who doesn't have an entire journey that they're on and have been on, and whether they've taken the time to reflect on that journey, to think through it. Some people are questioners, some people are not. Some people sort of coast unconsciously through life, and some people are really asking and making the connections and finding meaning, right? There's so many different ways to be a person. But because, theater especially gave me that place to tell stories, and Piven Theater specifically is focused on story theater. So it's narration, it's using fairy tales, it's finding the meaning in these sort of myths. And so I feel like I've just expanded that in my films and my documentaries to be like, okay, well, what if, like Joseph Campbell, right? If we're all the hero of our own story and we're all, whether we know it or not, we're on a hero's journey in this life. And so what if we frame it that way? What if we talk about it that way? What if we think about it that way? And so, I found people who didn't necessarily place themselves at the center of that kind of story to begin with, but I also think there's something about honoring elders and intergenerational dialogue that's crucial right now. And so I'm trying to find people who, to tell and elevate their stories, who are elders, and who have something great to share that we can then either build our life from, depending on where we are, or look at the life and say, oh, now I see these pieces of my story and why. For one example, the story of Michael D. McCarty, one of the screenings we had, I mean, he's an amazing man and he's had an incredible journey, but what's been amazing is to watch people receive his story. So there was one screening we had at a library in Chicago early on, and he happened to be in town from LA. And this woman stood up at the end and said, look, I came here because my boyfriend knows Michael and sort of dragged me here. I really didn't want to come. I'm at like one of the lowest points of my whole life and really just felt like, what's the point of life? And I just like came in like with so much heaviness and reluctance and depression. And she's like, I now, after watching this film, I don't feel like, it feels like a shadow just lifted. I feel completely different. I feel like I understand my purpose. I'm totally going to change. My life has just changed.
Right.
And that to me is what the power of story is. If we can witness each other, because no one is actually above anyone else. And no one has more, I mean, the way our power structure is set up, we have these ideas that there's this hierarchy. That's actually not true. And nobody's journey is more important than anyone else's. But we're told that that's not the case.
Right.
And so, even in the case of the Lords, who one of the things I was drawn to about Lords when I first met her was we were introduced by a mutual friend, is the way that Lords is a meaning maker.
Right.
She is so passionate just about the synchronicities of life, right? The fact that her grandparents got married on Pearl Harbor Day, and then years later, that's when they found out they were going to be incarcerated in a Japanese incarceration camp. And well, what is the meaning of that? Nobody can really say, but it's what you make of it.
Right.
And that there's just this connection. And I believe that one of her grandparents passed away on that date too. It's just a date that has significance for her.
Yeah.
And she's the person who's drawing a line there and saying, ooh, this is a thread of a story that is important for people to know. And I think we all have important stories to tell. And it's a matter of just basically standing up and saying, I have something to say, and my story does matter, and not diminishing ourselves, because that's what I feel like is empowering. Is not, somebody else can, a teacher can come and say, you're great at this, let me empower you. But there's a point at which it has to rise from within you. And hopefully the films that I make inspire people to find that in themselves, or to start, I hope that kids, teenagers, even younger kids, I'd say my movies are probably PG-13, but my daughter's 10 and seen them, that they would watch and be like, ooh, I want to look for those pivotal moments in my life, or, ooh, I wonder about my neighbor or my grandmother, or did they go through that? What was it like for them? And to just start to look a little bit beyond ourselves, but also look inward. It's like the both and.
As an educator, I think taking that concept of really just looking and hearing and listening, humanistic approach first, and then, because I think what we're taught in education is, well, I know what I was taught. Get that classroom managed and get them some information, and then have them regurgitate it back to you, right? And this is 20 years ago. Man, I don't know what's going on these days, but I hope it's changing. But when I did that switch, just like you said, when you start to listen and actually learn who your students are first, it's amazing. It's a life changer. It's a game changer. And I do know that in a previous interview, one of your things that you recommended everybody do is question everything. So I got to come out and say, okay, so we're in this pandemic. You're telling stories by listening. And over here in education, there's a whole group of us saying, we have to get humanistic. We have to teach the student first and then subjects. What's your question? How do you want to question education? And how would you like to see it improve through this? Kind of, attaching those two things. What would you like school to look like? That's a big question, but hey.
It's like in general, because when I started my documentary series, Belonging in the USA, Stories from Our Neighbors, I wanted to create a paradigm shift, or be a part of a paradigm shift in general, worldwide. And that paradigm shift is really about what I call revolutionary listening and radical empathy. And those two things are hand in hand. And I think it's what you're talking about in practicing. But I also feel like it's non-hierarchical. It's not top down. And so I'll give you this. I did not go to film school. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that film school is bad or nobody should go to film school, but I'm saying that I wanted to make films. Even in high school, I made my first documentary at that tutoring center. In Great Books, we had to do a project on the meaning of life. That was heavy. A project, and I loved it. That was like my favorite thing I ever did. And me and my classmate Caitlin, we made this documentary about the meaning of life, and we drove around and we would shout it out the car window, what's the meaning of life? And strangers on the street would answer. A lot of people gave that from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that they gave that page number, which now I'm forgetting. And then we asked these kids in this center what the meaning of life was. We got these, it was just an amazing experience. So I knew I wanted to do more of that, but I never actually considered studying documentary film. And I think it's partially because what matters in anything I do is story, right? Is just being able to tease out a story from a lot of information, because the story is beyond the information. And so I didn't follow a path. I studied directing then at Second City, right? Because I decided, well, it's really important to make people laugh. It's really important to me to have a sense of humor. It's really important to not be so heavy. And this was during like the Bush administration, when things seemed really, really heavy. I mean, it was post 9/11, like, but I was like, I need to laugh. Like, I want to make funny things. So what I'm saying is I take like all these ingredients of the different elements that formed who I am and how I make work, and that is me. So what I think I want to see in education, and I think I've shared with you, I mean, we've just taken our daughter out of school. We're unschooling her, which is self-directed learning. We're in this deschooling process, and I'm reading, and like I'm a researcher, so I'm like, I want to learn how to make documentaries. I have a library of books about how to. I asked a film professor I knew, what do I do? He said, don't go to film school. Here's the books to read. Here's your curriculum, basically, and then shoot as much as you can. And I shot everything for a year in my life. Like I was just filming all the time. So I think finding mentors. I feel like if we had I feel like what I'm learning from my research on education and talking to you even, so much money. I think in this country, we spend the most money maybe of any country on education, and we have like really poor outcomes still, whatever an outcome is. Because like, it's like, you mean a person? Like poor people, like what are we making?
Right.
This is not, what is the widget? It's a human life. Like it's not a widget, it's a human. So I think if we can start with, first of all, at the beginning of childhood, like the beginning, you're going to enter a system. You look at 3 and 4-year-olds. I was just with a friend's little 4-year-old. Oh, they're just so precious and so happy and so curious, and so like education to me should just continue that love of the world, the love of each other, the love of nature, the fascination, rather than trying to fit inside of this container or box. Expand what that is, or make a box for each person. Like, okay, you're into that, that's your box. And you want to change boxes, we'll make the box bigger. Like, and maybe have a mentor. I mean, I went recently to a Sudbury Valley school in Florida. These are democratic schools. You know, I don't think there's one model that's going to work for everything, first of all. So I think the public education is, I mean, I believe in it. I believe in it as sort of a right, but I think what it has to look like is going to be different for each person. And so can we create something that's agile enough to be that, where even you're saying to that little person, ask a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, not just what do you want to be when you grow up, but who are you? What did you come here for? I mean, I think there are other cultures on this planet that do a better job of that we could learn from, that are really clear about purpose and meaning and community building and interconnectedness and all these things that as a planet we need to really realign with as a country, but as a planet. And asking those little people not, do you want to be a fireman, a lawyer, a doctor? How about how are you going to make the world better? What are you here to give? Because if somebody is, I mean, my daughter I make music, I write songs and play guitar and sing. My daughter's into that too. And she can already play the piano and remember I played the piano for years. I was never as good as she is. She's just really good at it naturally. I want her to continue to love it. I don't want her to be coerced into practicing or, because I felt like my mom was really strict about piano. I started when I was 3 or 4, and I had to, and she might disagree with this. Sorry, Mom. But I remember that I had to practice piano every morning before I ate breakfast. And I remember feeling hungry, 4, and oh God, I have to play row, row, row your boat, and then I can eat. And it felt, punitive. So it made me resist it. I feel like education should be about love and delight and wonder and the human experience and emotion and empathy building and emotional intelligence. Like it's like a buzzword, but it's not like, again, it's not a widget. It's like the most fundamental way to make the world better is if we just, especially, I mean, I'm thinking especially for men and boys who are so socialized and programmed not to live the fullness of their human emotions.
Right. Right.
I mean, women too, but I think men really have that against them, as a point against them, of just not being able to express very much the spectrum of emotions. So unless you happen to go to acting school, then it's free for all. But like most people don't. And I think actually using the arts too, not like you have to be an artist, like you're a painter, fine, you get to paint, but just we're creative beings. Like that's what makes us human. So making that a priority, a fundamental thing. And you said something about subjects or teaching the person, not the subject. I'm like, I really feel like do away with subjects. Like everything is everything. So so we're selling our house now, right? And our daughter is like a part of this whole, she's learning real life, practical, step by step. We made a list at the beginning. Here's the steps to get your house on the market. Here's the steps to look for another thing, like all the steps. What is a mortgage? What is the percentages? All this stuff. It's math.
Yeah.
It's I don't know. It's like, I can't even categorize it, but it is a lot of different subjects in one.
Yes.
And they're life skills that I don't feel like I was taught by any of my schooling.
Right.
So that's a really long answer, but
no, I mean, it's what I'm hearing is really, and it is your mantra, right? You got to say it.
If you exist, you belong.
Yes, I just love that, because if you exist in school, that's what we're trying to do. I was on a conversation this morning with a group of educators around the world, and it was amazing because every one of us said, let's build a safe place for failure. Okay, so then we're, it's very complicated and another thing.
But nobody likes to fail, right? Like as an artist or a creator, I hate, like, yes, it stops you. And I always tell my daughter, we were just talking about it today, because we're about to really make this leap to move across the country, and I'm scared, and so is she. And I'm like, okay, but what is courage? Like, what is bravery? It is feeling the fear and doing it anyway.
You're right.
As a creative person, I have been really lucky. But I've also, I felt like for all the maybe outward, like you said, I have all these awards. I don't even care. That's like inconsequential to me, because I'm like, oh, but, have I touched these people? Have this, like, what my measures are for myself. And failure, like, I don't even know what that means. Like, I think that's also this weird concept that we have. Because what is failure? Because what is success? And like success, that's one of the questions I ask everyone I interview, basically, especially because I work, I have a business where I make these legacy films for high-powered, very wealthy families. And that's a question I always ask. And it's just so fascinating, because you would be surprised how unsuccessful some billionaires might feel. Right? Or how so successful somebody who lives in a trailer might feel, right? It's not external. So that if you exist, you belong. I'm like, I really believe that, but then I also understand it has to be in the context of community, though. Right. Like, we need each other to create that sense of belonging, because as humans, we want connection. We want people to see us and hear us and acknowledge that we are here and love us. I mean, love. And that's the other thing. I feel like in Argentina, my husband's from Argentina, and I have a lot of friends there. I have some teacher friends there. In Argentina, everybody kisses each other on the cheek, right? You kiss your doctor on the cheek, right? It's like just a more physical, warm culture, which I know there must be really struggling in this pandemic.
Yeah, that's the first thing that came to my mind.
But that's why the country is totally shut down too, I think, because they're trying to mitigate that. But like just that simple cultural difference, right? Like a kid who goes to school. Now, I'm not saying that every kid loves their teacher, but there's love in the room. Like love is a part of the context of learning. And I think that honestly, probably for me, the times that I've learned the most is when I felt loved by my teachers, and the times that I felt most insecure and most unable to be myself was when I was feeling judged or criticized, or, like I wasn't worthy enough, and that I wasn't meeting some standards. And it wasn't even about performance. It was just like, do you see and love me? And that's what every single person wants.
And now, I mean, within a we're doing this on in classrooms and such, and we're trying to figure out different ways that we can actually meet the students where they are, and keeping upbeat. I would fair to say the teachers also that you really just gelled with, were they really happy? Did they really like what they did?
Oh, I'm sure. It makes a huge difference. I mean, why does somebody become a teacher or an educator? And what even is that?
Right.
Right? Like, that's what I say, question everything. Like, I don't
Exactly.
like to take anything at face value. I really do. And I also have this very annoying talent of being able to see like multiple sides of every issue.
Yeah.
Like I could argue myself into and out of everything. I'm also a lawyer's daughter. Like that comes from that too. But like just being able, I think that's part of empathy, right? Is like this perspective building, different points of view. And it's not about right or wrong. It's also not about success or failure. Like, yes, allowing failure. And I think in the context of the system we have now, that has to become just a concept that's embraced. But there is no such thing as any creative process without the feeling. It doesn't even have to mean failure. I guess it's that feeling that things are just really going to shit. Am I allowed to? I already swear.
Yeah.
Like that things are just falling apart.
Right.
That it's like that feeling that you're on the top of the roller coaster, but you're bracing yourself and you don't want to fall down that I'm not a roller coaster person. So like, that's a good analogy for me. But like just that, oh my gosh, holy shit, I can't do this.
Right.
I don't want to do it. It's like labor. When you're giving birth to a child, there's that point at which they say, you think you're like, I can't do this, I'm done. And that's like the transition point. And you're like, okay, you're pushing. Same with anything creative as humans. I think we always are going to resist our growth on some level.
Right.
It's never going to be a straight line. Children, you have kids, like they learn something. Let's say they are really learning to read, and well, they might start wetting their bed. Like it's 2 steps, forward, back. It's not a straight line. And so I feel like the education model we have right now is like A, B, C, D. And that's just not how life is. It's not how humans are. It's inhumane. It's kind of cruel, because if you don't fit that mold and you can't make yourself do the thing in a linear fashion, you're going to always question who you are and think something's wrong with you.
Right. And there's labels in there. There's, I heard it somewhere. I was on a Clubhouse chat or somewhere, and I did not say this. Somebody way more brilliant than I am in that capacity of education, but we've always had a credential industry. We've never really had an education industry, and that's that linear piece. And that got my mind like spinning. And it's very similar to how you're talking about, being vulnerable, being brave, being somebody who's going to be out there and learn, and that's okay, where we're going to, go all over the place. I like to consider failure learning, and then success, they both, if success goes up, learning goes down, and then it switches. And that came from another gentleman this morning on the chat, and it was just eye-opening. So
Joyce and Vern Piven would always talk about the off-balance moment. And that's that, like, it's like this moment of possibility, like, but that's what you're actually seeking as a creative being. You're like, ooh, I don't want to be predicting everything. And I used to teach improv too at Second City and Piven. And I always say this to people still, okay, unless you have some magical information I don't have, and Peter, exactly how this conversation is going to go, you have a script and I don't have it. Like, everything is improv. We are always improvising our lives. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And so, like, how it's that quote I have up here from Einstein: there are only 2 ways to live your life. One is though nothing is a miracle. The other is though everything is a miracle. It's just that simple. And that's the only kind of black and white thinking I like to get into. I'm like, okay, well, I choose to feel like I have a purpose on life. You may think that you have no purpose, and fine. Who's, like you said, who's happier? Right. And it's not all about happiness either. I don't think that life is always going to be about happiness, but what moves you towards your joy, what makes you come alive. And I feel like what I want to see in my daughter, what I want to see in myself and the people I'm around are like, is aliveness, is passion for being alive, because it is so finite. And that's the other thing I think that we need to do better at. as a society, but definitely in education, is awareness of mortality, talking about death, talking about, and I think the pandemic is providing an amazing opportunity for that. And I hope that educators in classrooms are using it. I don't know if it's too taboo. It is really taboo in our culture to talk about death.
Right.
But if little kids had that awareness of, okay, so you have this potential many years on this planet. What are you going to do with them? You could do anything. Here's some examples of how people have lived their lives. What are you going to do? And that kid may say, I'm going to create a blabagoduba. And like, nobody knows what that is. They're like, ooh, what is that? Instead of being like, that doesn't exist. You don't know what you're talking about. Go make a pie. You know, we're making pies today. Let that kid create that mythical thing, and it may just change the planet for the better. I mean, all the inventors, all the sort of magic makers, I mean, all the technology we have, all the arts we have, it came from people being willing to look stupid, first of all.
Right. Yeah.
And to just do something that everyone might have thought. I mean, when I started my documentary series, and I laugh at myself now, I really thought that I was going to make 10 films in 1 year. That was my goal. It was insane. I had no idea what, I mean, I was like, well, I just do it. I have the equipment. I'll find the stories here. Now I'm on my third one and it's been 4 years, but still I'm not, that doesn't count as a failure to me because I persevered through it and I've learned so much. And I think that's the other thing. It's not about goals, like goal setting and saying, I'm going to do this thing and then it's going to look like this. And I'm going to do this next thing. It's like, what do you do? What's the process of life? Like the process of creating, the process of learning. That's where the gold is, not like the information regurgitation or the retention. And that's what real education, I feel like, is and should be.
I have an app called We Croak, and it reminds me 5 times a day I'm going to die. It's from, I think it's Burmese culture, and it's amazing. Like it really did another friend of mine. So I love that idea of let's not be afraid of that. Let's embrace that. Let's go with it. It's a little easier with high school. I teach secondary, primary. Hey, my wife does that. So
well, but maybe, I mean, you might still be afraid. I mean, I feel like my daughter from a young age was we had some death young. When she was 2, my father-in-law died, and then when she was 4, our cousin died young. So she was, and we didn't shelter her from it completely. I mean, we didn't do this funeral thing, but we did go and were present with the grieving, let's say, in Argentina. And so I know she went through a period where she was like, are you going to die before me? Like, oh gosh, because I think what really scares us about death is the pain surrounding losing people that we love, which if we're lucky, are going to get to experience, right? Like it's not going to be us first. So I feel like it is scary, and acknowledging that. I think what we don't know how to do well still, and what, again, I hope my films help fill in a little bit, is like, there's this human experience and it involves all of these emotions and it involves all of this suffering and struggle and challenge. And it's not always a straight line. And it's not like you're just going to get to a point and be like, everything's so wonderful, because sometimes it's going to suck again. Like Michael, I just had him on my podcast. He is going through cancer right now. He went through so much in his life. You're like, okay, he must be done. He's 70. No, his siblings both died during the pandemic, and he got a cancer diagnosis. So he's continuing to live human reality and be faced with challenges. But again, it's how he shows up to those. And every single day, that's going to be different. Did you ever read the 4 Agreements?
Yes. Yeah.
So I love my favorite one, I guess, because maybe it's the easiest one in a way, is always do your best. And your best is going to be different based on how much sleep did you get? Did you have enough water? Did you get in a fight with somebody? Did somebody cut you off in traffic? Like, those are all, they impact us. We impact each other. But you can also be someone like Michael is this. I think Lourdes is this. Definitely Alicia and Antonio in my second film are like this. They're like lights in the world. They bring people up. They feel most alive, I think, when they're inspiring other people, when they're touching other people's lives, when they're connecting. And so I guess that's true for me too. I think it's probably true for you. And maybe for really inspired and inspiring teachers, educators, it's about that zest and passion for living and love of humans. Because I don't think you can even, I don't believe that children are inferior to adults, or that, they don't know as much. I've learned a ton from 3-year-olds. Like, whoa, 2 and 3-year-olds can be some of the wisest people you ever really talk to.
Absolutely.
and it goes and it continues. You know, kids are very wise, and we could do better to listen to them and notice what they pay attention to, what they observe and see, because it's often the adults that are mucking things up from our own programming, right?
There's a reason I do a podcast, and that's because of my previous students kind of teaching me, you know, all the different ways that we can communicate and connect. It's awesome. Wanted to round out and ask you what's coming next. What's Arielle doing next, and how can people find your work?
Well, my website is belongingintheusa.com, which you can find. I have 3 websites, but that's the one I'll send people to for today. And you can find trailers for all 3 films of this documentary series on there. And then I'm also launching a podcast. I don't know when this will be heard by people, but it'll be in spring. It'll be the Belonging in the USA podcast. You can also find that on the website. You can, follow it and listen to it. You're going to be a guest on it.
Yes,
I'm excited. We're having a lot of, because basically during the pandemic, I'd had a few virtual. I've had some virtual screenings. If you sign up for the mailing list, you can get on that list to find out about them. But I'm someone who really feeds off of an audience and just the connection of humans in a room. So I'm kind of putting that on the back burner till we can gather in person again. I hope one day eventually. And the podcast is a way for me to continue to have uplifting, inspiring conversations that help me learn.
Right.
And hopefully whoever listens will also, have a better day because they did.
Well, I can't thank you enough. Arielle Nobile, thank you so much for hanging out with us on Disrupt Education and just being a storyteller, an empath, a radical empath, and somebody who really is just, your purpose is just right out. And I appreciate you sharing your entire story today.
Thank you so much, Peter. It was fun.
And thank you all listeners for hanging out with us on Disrupt Education. Make sure you subscribe. Give us some feedback. 5 stars always help. We'll see you next time.